we want to understand China's intentions for others around the world as they expand their influence and their propaganda and their strength, we should look no further than how they treat their own people, and especially their own Muslim population, the Uyghur population. And so in recent years, they have been putting this non-radical Muslim group into camps, and they have been misidentifying this group as one that is connected with Al-Qaeda. So they have been exploiting the post 9/11 hysteria for their own agenda. So there's a reason, of course, why China and Russia and other governments never stood against the United States. When the 9/11 deception was being rolled out and innocent countries that had nothing to do with 9/11 were bombed and invaded, there's a reason why other countries never said a word as millions of Muslims were killed. But over time, we would see both Russia and China and other governments grandstand like they're the good guys. And there's a lot of people convinced that China are the good guys as they rebuild, after the U.S. has spent years bombing and destroying and killing. And so for people that don't know any better, it looks like China is about to bring the world peace, prosperity, and so much more. And what I see is a selfish nature in modern day human consciousness that doesn't care about the people that are suffering within China's borders and what we know has been done and the slave labor that is going on. And so when a lot of people think about slave labor, they might not be thinking about the Uyghurs, this ethnic minority population, and they may not be connecting the dots and realizing that, here we have almost a synchronization of efforts on the part of the superpower nations to target Islamic groups, even if they have nothing to do with radical Muslims or ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or other groups. By the way, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the bombing in Iran. Isn't that convenient? As a lot of people suspect that ISIS is being controlled by you-know-who. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far. I want to stay on topic here. But here we have a situation in which Iran is blaming both the United States and Mossad for the recent bombing or terrorist attack in Iran. It's almost as if the U.S. is trying to push Iran into responding or doing something. So anyway, we're seeing the escalation of these things. And because of what the U.S. is doing and has done, China and Russia, in so many different ways, through their propaganda networks and their troll armies, in many places on the internet, including Twitter, are fighting an ongoing info war to make themselves look like the good guys and to counter any criticism of what they are doing in their own countries. So when we look over at Twitter, there is a massive amount of Chinese activity. And perhaps I have directly engaged some of these info warriors from the East. I think that's very possible. I think it's a little disturbing how many trolls are active right now on Twitter. I said for years, folks, there's something about Elon Musk that we can't trust. And I have shared various theories about him for years in a space program, going back at least 10 years. And here we are now seeing Elon Musk, the darling of the right and others on the left, so both the left and the right and other groups around the world, because of the free speech that Twitter allows, but yet many turning a blind eye to Elon Musk's connections in China and his trips to China and his business practices in China. And so I think a lot of people just don't want to look at the truth because it bothers them. And if they recognize there's evil in this world, It's almost as if that people don't want to know that, because if they were to know that, there's like a sense of responsibility that we have, that we may feel within, to do something about it, to get rid of it, to expose it, to shine the light on it. And that takes risk. That takes discipline. Like I said before, you can't go around serving Satan and then exposing Satan. You have to pick a side. You have to fully commit yourself. And there's a lot of people out there that aren't fully committed. There are people out there that will criticize China and will say that, there are these corrupt ties between China and Biden, which there are, and the Clintons, which there are, and they will overlook other developments and news that comes out. For example, new information. In Trump Tower, there is space that is being leased by a company tied to the Chinese government. And there's other information regarding Trump's foreign ties, including to the Saudis. And so people will look at it when it fits into their own political lens, but they will not look at it when it doesn't fit into their own political lens. So human beings have the potential to be intelligent with regards to certain things. But they will be so intelligent, in fact, that they will filter out information that will challenge their own bullshit belief systems. It's like that saying, being too intelligent for your own good. And so people need to start seeing reality as it is. So I'm reading this book called Surveillance State. As I mentioned recently, it's a good book. I think that there should be some sort of an info chart or a graph or a bullet point list or a website that lists all the really important details that you need to be aware of. So I can't list them all to you here and now, but I'm almost finished with the book. But essentially, we're dealing with a situation in which, over the last decade or so, in this region of China, which the Uyghurs say is actually known as East Turkestan, while it's known by another name to the Chinese. We have a situation that's similar to that in Palestine and Gaza, and in which we have outside settlement coming from governmental decisions, which is displacing people and completely legitimizing people being pushed out of their homes and being oppressed by another group. Okay, so we do see the oppression of the Palestinians on the part of the IDF and the Israelis. And when we look at China, we see a group called the Han Chinese, which is the majority ethnic group apparently in China. And there is a big campaign at present afoot to encourage mass migration into these Uyghur areas, in which there's been an estimated 1 million to 1.5 million put into these camps, which I believe does include forced labor and, unfortunately, rape and sexual assault. And you might want to take a look at the Uyghurs also. There's been a leaked video from the last year or so of their mugshots, of the pictures, the photographs they have taken. So there's a lot of revelations within this book. As I said, one of them is Intel's participation in setting up their infrastructure, their surveillance infrastructure, which has been used to track these individuals, which of course includes the harvesting of DNA, right? They're constantly notified to turn themselves in or come into their local station as they set up these Chinese police stations all throughout the Uyghur district. And again, they have used the post 9/11 war, or the war on terror, to their benefit in China, as has other governments like Russia, like the UK, and other governments in Europe and other places around the world. Many corrupt governments around the world have used the events, the staged events of 9/11, to their own benefit. So they are not innocent in the cover up of what took place that day. And of course, there's more of a historical backdrop that we can see with regards to the Uyghurs in China. And so I don't know very much about that. But I'm going to start doing my research. I watched a number of videos last night. And so it overall just has me feeling sad and disappointed. But this is a cause worth fighting. I don't think that people should just be concerned about Americans and Americans' future. They should be concerned about the Palestinians and the Afghans and other groups and the Uyghurs, as well as the concern about the plight of Asian Americans, especially Chinese Americans, in the event that the U.S. goes to war with China. I don't have like this resentment towards Chinese people because of what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghurs. I'm choosing to have discernment. Not all people are going to have discernment. Unfortunately, though, and I'm being realistic here, that doesn't mean that all Chinese people are innocent. That means Chinese immigrants in the U.S. Some of them are, in fact, programmed by the CCP, and many of them are not. But a day is going to come, folks, where we may be at war with China, or China may be attacking the U.S. or taking down aspects of our infrastructure. And when that day happens, and or when other attacks happen, it's going to be a dark day for Asian Americans. And that really bothers me. For those of us that have had friends or have friends that are Asian Americans, for those of us that have seen the beautiful side of Asian American culture, not just going to Chinese restaurants, but to museums and things of that nature. It's going to be traumatizing for regular people to see people being harmed in a time of war. And ultimately, a lot of people aren't in a mindset of helping others. We're so oppressed globally, even though a lot of people are in Stockholm syndrome, as in they have sympathy for their captors, that they don't have the open-hearted consciousness or spiritual power or determination or willpower to look at things like this. And if they do, they certainly don't connect the dots. So we do see some discussion about the Uyghurs in the mainstream media, more so than there has been in the past. The situation is also getting worse. But are they starting to connect the dots with the situation and realize that other governments are involved in this, that other corporations based in America and the West are involved in the oppression of these groups? Or are they just going to blame China? Often they're just going to blame China, especially the right wing, as they will point the finger at the left wing, but look away from Republicans and others that have done business in China or have invested money in China's surveillance network. And there's a number of Westerners and corporations that have played a role in China's technological buildup, whether it be their domestic surveillance society, their computers, their missiles, their satellite technology, and on down the list. So I'm going to talk about some of the takeaways of the book in stages. One thing that I want to mention now, though, so I'm trying to do this by memory. They had some sort of surveillance software set up monitoring the Uyghur section of China. And it was some sort of program that was accessible online. And it was just some sort of a program where you can go in to certain addresses and places and access the cameras, apparently via your own laptop if you had the login information, and basically use those cameras to zoom in and spy on individual people, maybe even to use that database to look up, say, for example, specific individuals, and then observe them from the cameras that are around them, like a super creepy surveillance network. monitoring the Uyghur area. And basically in China, somebody put it online and posted in some sort of a message board, the login information and the password information, so anybody could log in to basically a non-secure surveillance network and take advantage of it. And I'm seeing a lot of signs of this. The modern day websites and technologies that are being unraveled and given to us, in many cases for free, technologies like ChatGPT and other AI technologies. And by the way, apparently Mike Adams and Alex Jones are about to develop their own AI, right? And so what a lot of people don't realize is that while they cheer on a lot of these free technologies that can do a lot of things for them, there's a dark side to it. And a lot of these technologies that have been given to us have the abilities to do harm to other people within our own society. They have weaponized the internet and these technologies in a number of ways. Not so greatly that we can free ourselves from the tyrannical system that we're in, but they've armed us enough to do a certain amount of damage to each other. And that is a part of the agenda. That is China's vision for dominating America, to create such a dramatic situation domestically within the U.S. as far as unrest goes and protests go and riots go, that we naturally become weakened from the experience, right? We can think back to past protests in which roads have been shut down. And, we see major pushes from certain activists at certain times to shut down the roads. And then we might see on social media, a lot of following behind certain posts in which there's calls to shut down the roads. And I think in some cases, certain calls to action online in America, there's a reason why there's millions of people following certain posts. And there's various blogs and articles that have hypothesized that China and or other governments have worked behind the scenes to boost the algorithm, if you will, to boost the posts in which there are calls for violence and property destruction. And so there is this way in which the internet has been weaponized, right? But we're already so taken over to a certain degree, right, within our own government, and I believe that we're talking about both parties, not just the Biden administration, that we don't really get told the truth by our own government. We get told glimpses of truth, and they may make certain moves to appease the masses, to make it look like they're pushing back. But they don't really take the proper actions that they need to stop the problem. As far as Trump's concerned, yeah, he put a ban on, I believe, complete surveillance systems, a ban on them being sold from Western companies, American companies, to China. But from what I read, they don't need a complete system to do what they're doing to the Uyghurs. It's down to individual components and parts. So in that sense, it sounds comparable to a drug making operation where certain components and chemicals and ingredients are needed. And so nothing's really being done at all to stop China from what it's doing to the Uyghurs. But there is the posturing, there are the requests from the United Nations. So there is on paper acknowledgement, but behind the scenes, we have the reality of slave labor, although some of it has been reduced in the last year or so, as some of it has been exposed. And what I'm talking about within regards to this is cotton, solar panels, other goods, but especially seafood. Okay, there's a report here that talks about the Uyghurs being used to manufacture and or package seafood in China. And of course, this also includes seafood that is caught by U.S. companies in the United States or near U.S. waters that is then shipped to China to then be shipped back to us. So let me read here just a little bit from Political. Few workplaces are as gritty and brutal as distant water fishing ships from China, but there are a lot of them. With as many as 6,500 ships, China operates the world's largest distant water fishing fleet, which is more than double the size of its next competitor. It's rarely easy for crew members to leave these ships, and often it's forbidden. With ships so far from shore, constantly in transit, typically operating in international waters, where national governments have limited jurisdiction, the severity and extent of forced labor in China's seafood supply chain has long been difficult to measure. Okay. The U.S. government is among the largest institutional buyers of seafood, purchasing more than 400 million in 2022. The investigation found that a portion of the spending goes towards importers that source fish from processing plants using Uyghur labor in violation of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which was passed almost unanimously in December 2021 and requires U.S. Customs and Border Protection to block the import of goods produced by Muslim Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities from Xinjiang province. And I'll try to find out exactly how to say that, but that is the region that we are discussing, the Muslim region in northwest China, in which these Uyghurs are living, spelled Xinjiang. The Chinese government has systematically subjected these groups in recent years to forced labor programs at factories across the country, monitored by uniformed guards in dorms surrounded by barbed wire. So it talks about some of the companies that have ended up purchasing this seafood. And we are talking about Albertsons, Walmart, and Kroger. And several of these grocery stores did not reply to Political's request for comment. Some of the other companies and restaurants that were purchasing some of this seafood have stopped. And we're just talking about the last year or so. So this was going on for multiple years. Tomatoes is also a good. Next to cotton and solar panels. Customs and Border Protection have detained more than $1 billion of these goods. Okay, but seafood imports have largely slipped oversight. Largely, partly because plants relying on these workers are located far from Xinjiang, a western area of the country, that is among the farthest from the sea of anywhere on the planet. So the Chinese government has instead forcibly relocated tens of thousands of these workers, loading them onto planes and buses and trains, and sending them to seafood processing plants in the Shandong province, a fishing hub on the eastern coast. So this is a rather lengthy political article. The investigation found that 50 million worth of salmon was supplied to federally funded soup kitchens and programs to feed low-income elders by importers that source from plants using Uyghur labor. So the school system is using this tainted slave seafood. Not to mention the contamination of the oceans from Fukushima and other pollution. Right? So it's not exactly the healthiest seafood to be eating. So schools, prisons, and the military Okay, and I had a feeling, a strong feeling for a while, that food from the military is unhealthy and may cause serious health problems. And you want to think about things from a spiritual perspective. It's not just the nutrients in the food; it's the vibration of what is going on around the food and the food that is being moved around. And Joe, just the modern day that we are eating, with food being moved around and shipped from one distant location to another distant location, is totally out of balance with nature. We are dependent right now on the system providing food to us in a particular way, but it's not in line with nature and it comes at a cost. Using questionable farming practices to, of course, achieve a certain amount of vegetation as far as growing the food. So we talk about Monsanto and GMO and things of that nature. What we ought to be doing, if we are able to, is trying to step away from this system, not only the streaming video content and the disinformation, but the mainstream diets. And as long as we're living in these modern day cities, which most of us are, we're subjected to the consensus reality, essentially how things are. And in many cases, we're not in control. And so walking through the modern day grocery store is in many cases like walking through some sort of a scientific plant or a lab where we are the guinea pigs. There's a video that I made years ago called Supermarket Asylum. And I also noted months ago that because of the stresses going on in the world, with the eclipses, which are motivating the wars and causing some people to be off a little bit more than they normally would be, up into and including what I would call possessed individuals, um, I recommend curtailing eating out, because people can't affect the food that they're touching when they're not in a good space. And so, one of the reasons why I think some people talk about halal meat or organic food or things of that nature is so that it has a higher energy as opposed to meat that's treated a certain way, raised a certain way, animals that are treated a certain way, chickens, for example. It has an effect on the person who eats that meat. So here we have the situation where slaves are involved in the packaging and production of this seafood in these foreign plants, going around the world, feeding people around the world from America to the EU. And so people can be affected by the slave consciousness of not only the animals, but the human beings that are either making the food in the kitchen, that in many cases are slaves, in their own way, even if they're getting paid. It's not as if the money that they're getting paid is enough for them to actually live and pay for an apartment in the average American city. Not anymore. In the past, yes. 10 years ago, maybe. 20 years ago, likely. 30 years ago, yes. Today, no. So we're seeing the rise in slave labor incrementally. And because of the propaganda of the post 9/11 world and the widespread war on Islam, including innocent Muslims that have done nothing to us on 9/11 or since that day, nor before, people are callous, and a certain amount of the population is just going to tune out of what is taking place with regards to the weaker population, unless, of course, they can make it political. Right. But are there people on the right, for example, trying to hold Donald Trump accountable for having his own business dealings with China and Trump Tower renting out office space to a company that's controlled by the Communist Chinese? Are they going to try to hold him accountable for having certain connections to China? And there's other articles that go deeper and reports regarding the extent of his dealings in China, that which we know of. There's always new things that are being revealed, right? And there'll be more revealed in the coming years. It's also said that there may have been some Chinese spy balloons that flew over the U.S. while Trump was in office, but nothing was done. Yeah, I've had some of this salmon from Walmart, and not even the expensive stuff, like the cheap frozen stuff. And yeah, it didn't taste right, and who knows why? Maybe it was handled by a slave. But apparently, going back to this article, the U.S. government is by no means the only buyer of seafood coming from these ships and the processing facilities in violation of the import ban. The investigation found more than 6,000 tons of seafood coming from the plants since June 2022. Went to the U.S. restaurant chains, grocery stores, and food service companies, including Walmart, Costco, Kroger, and Cisco. And there's more companies listed. The investigation found that seafood from these plants going to companies in the EU, Australia, South America, and the Middle East. But the revelation that even the U.S. government is buying goods tainted by Chinese forced labor is striking, since purchases paid for by taxpayer dollars, okay, are supposed to face higher scrutiny. So the American people are paying for this slave labor, forced labor, seafood, which is ending up in prisons, the school system, and the military. So, in many, many ways, we can talk about how they don't even care about their own people, their own veterans, their own servicemen. Look at how many servicemen are in the streets of America with unresolved mental health problems. They don't even care about, you know, PTSD healing and treatment for the troops. Obviously, as I said before, in many areas in the U.S., even people that serve the U.S. military cannot access medical marijuana for their own PTSD. And I don't think that you need to have PTSD to have a right to consume medical marijuana. Going back to the article, seafood is the planet's last source of wild protein and is also the largest internationally traded food commodity. China is the world's largest seafood producer and exporter. A large proportion of fish consumed by the U.S. is caught or processed by China. Yeah, it's quite the long article. Yeah, so let me cover some other things. Over on Twitter, there's a number of people out there that are talking about the Epstein list and their bots. And they talk about the people that are listed on the flight list, or are believed to have been associated with Epstein. And then they list a number of foreign leaders, including Z, including Putin, including the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and others. And so there's like multiple posts saying that, yeah, these guys were on the flight list, but these guys were not. In other words, there are trolls out there, bots out there on Twitter, with the help of Elon Musk, that are there to create this perception of balance in the force, if you will, when it comes to global politics, with people promoting these foreign dictators, which, of course, for a reason, have changed the law in their own country, as he has, as Putin has, to stay in power for life. I believe Putin has. At least he has tried to, right? So that is not an accident. So we see on Twitter a wide amount of pushback, and there's certain accounts that I've engaged with. I mentioned that, and so there's certain accounts in which they might be posing as, say, a person in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and yet they might also be posting a wide amount of Chinese propaganda. saying that anybody that doesn't see how great China is for the Muslim world is basically an idiot. And I start to see these posts from this individual on Twitter talking like this, and then other people that are connected to him pushing pro CCP content of a variety of kinds, while putting out some interesting content about their own plight, or about the plight of refugees or the victims of war. Issues that I think are important that need to be discussed. But to then mix that discussion, a discussion about the victims of war as a result of what the U.S. has done in Afghanistan and or Iraq and other countries, and then to pivot to promoting the CCP. So people need to have discernment, right? There's nothing wrong with being critical of war, being critical of your own government, of the United States. But it's another thing to then prop up other governments as the good guy when they haven't been the good guy for years, right? That's really suspicious for there to be people out there on Twitter saying that somebody is basically an idiot if they don't see how great China is for the Muslim world. What? Because they're building a few cities in Iraq? Again, look at what they're doing to the Uyghurs in their own government. So let's move on to some of the other things and let this be an introduction, right? It's not even a complete overview because I don't even understand how deep the problem is. But this is something that has been building and building, like I said, in the last decade, with help from US technology. And there are also Chinese technologies and software programs, facial recognition programs that can identify people also by race and then thus profile them. There are these programs that have been purchased or obtained in the US, right, by police departments that are secretly using these technologies to identify people in the crowd, to then take a picture of someone in a crowd and then bring up their social media history. And some of this technology used to be out there in the form of, Facebook used to have it, where someone's face was uploaded, and then immediately you knew their name or they were tagged, and they removed that. So, like I said, the internet is full of various software programs and things of that nature that seem to be capable of doing harm to other individuals. And this is a testimony to the level of human consciousness in our world today, the level of harm that humans are doing to other humans, and how the powers that be, which are really being ruled by Satan and evil forces, they are creating as many means and ways as possible for people to engage in this evil. And there was a number of movies that came out, by the way, The Purge. There's something about these movies, this series of movies, The Purge. It's almost as if that reality is being pushed on us. It's almost as if through the lockdowns that they get their practice, right? Because you can have a lockdown, but you're still going to have the reality of criminal behavior, the reality that some people need to eat also, and that more people are being pushed into poverty, which is going to be resulting in some people, unfortunately, turning to crime. They don't all need to turn to crime. We know that. But for some people in the society, it can be very difficult to make a living um, for a number of reasons. And so some people, due to intelligence factors, discipline, morality issues, they find it acceptable within themselves to turn to crime. Not to mention all the Netflix shows, as I mentioned, that promote various types of crime, gangsterism, things of that nature. So during the lockdowns, during the recent COVID-19 health event, we saw an increase in catalytic converter thefts, which to me is a pretty nasty thing to do to an individual. It's a very expensive thing to have repaired. It costs thousands of dollars. It devalues a car because then you have to go for a second market or second hand catalytic converter. It's an expensive fix, and I know people that have had this happen to them. And so it's like a purge like reality in which they can control the system, force people into a lockdown, and then pull back law enforcement on certain levels to a certain degree. which can allow the criminal element to flourish, or law enforcement, as it is right now, can just simply be overtaken by an increase in crime that it's simply not trained or equipped to deal with. And so, from movies out there like The Purge and social media promoting violence towards different groups and building up this internal angst and angst and angst, there's something about, again, this theme in the movie The Purge that has me concerned about our modern day society. And you can also argue, one could, that the pre 9/11 world had a lot of that purge propaganda regarding Middle Eastern people, with all of the movies that were put out before 9/11 that featured the Middle Eastern boogeyman, whether it be a Chuck Norris movie or an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie such as True Lies, or one of the other many movies that were made during that time period. It was almost as if they were getting ready to release the Americans onto other countries to experience their purge, their night or week or period of mass destruction. I noticed a lot of propaganda and violence in the 1980s and 90s. And even in pro wrestling, you had the Middle Eastern boogeyman, from the Sheik to others. Even in the movie The Wrestler, which came out in 2009, which is not necessarily based on a true story, but based on, on a alleged life of a wrestler. You had in the intro, it shows the wrestler that he wrestled years earlier, and it's some sort of Iranian character. So from wrestling to pop culture to TV shows to movies, they have constantly had the Middle Eastern boogeyman threat. So when 9/11 happened, they already had that type of resentment built up within society, and a lot of violent programming. Uh, there's lots of examples we can provide to show that. So when 9/11 happened, there was a whole generation of brainwashed human beings that were basically unleashed on the third world, and in some cases given steroids by their commanders in Iraq and or Afghanistan. At least this is what I've heard from others. Not a surprise there. And so people in this culture have never been taught to have discernment between radical Muslims and Muslims that are spiritual. They have been basically brainwashed into thinking that there is no such thing as a spiritual Muslim. And that's not true. That's bullshit. There is a spiritual side of Islam. By the way, the Antichrist is described as having one eye in the Islamic book. So if people are going to be living in a society where countries are bombing Islamic countries back to the Stone Age, and while the US and China prepare to go to war against each other, they both have their own war on Islam and Islamic communities. That includes Russia as well, okay, which is very involved and radicalized in American communities, right? In 2014, 15, and 16, with the fake news bomb that hit at that time. And it would be in 2014 that the travel restrictions would really hit the Uyghurs, in conjunction with them being shipped off to these re-education camps slash concentration camps. So there seems to be something about that period in time in which, as I said before, the switch programming, nations around the world begin to tighten the screws on these populations. So I am suggesting to you again and again and again that these superpower nations are literally coordinating behind the scenes some sort of attack and assault on Islamic communities around the world. Meanwhile, these superstate nations prepare to go to war amongst themselves. Likely a stage managed conflict in which the winner has already been determined. Again, that's how I see things unfolding. So, the nightmare situation for the Uyghurs, especially the women, is astronomical. And women should care. Whether Chinese, American, Middle Eastern, black, it doesn't matter what their ethnicity is. If women care about women and women's rights and things of that nature, they should care about what's happening to women around the world despite their religion. So check this out, and this leads me to two other thoughts. There are forced marriages taking place. Okay. The Uyghurs are being forced to marry, again, the Han Chinese, which is the dominant Chinese ethnicity, which, again, Xi is encouraging people to immigrate to and move to. Okay. More on that in the video that we're going to show. We're going to show a video in a few minutes. But think about that and the other article that I shared with you about Chinese women upset with Xi and his demands for them to produce more babies, more Chinese babies. Okay, what are they preparing for that they need so many babies? It wasn't very long ago there was a one-child policy in China. Now they want more babies. Why do they want more babies? And this is going to influence China to be more aggressive with other nations in the future, in the event of some sort of a conflict. And what I'm getting at is, if there's a human trafficking epidemic, is their desire for an increased population going to play a role in that? Okay, so this is apparently being done to the Uyghurs to erase their bloodline. Okay, and so as a result, by the way, of the one-child policy, you had way more men in China than women. This has been an issue for years there. So there isn't an equal population of men and women in China. So is this going to motivate China down the line to harvest, if you will, female human incubators of life, also known as women, from countries that they later may be occupying? So I think that we need to have the maturity at this point in time to connect the dots, see what they're doing to their own population, see what they're doing to the female population of the ethnic minorities, the Uyghurs, that they're dominating, and you know, these are rational questions to ask. Now, I talked about the dark side of pornography, and there's a major website other than Pornhub, which happens to be owned by some company in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, obviously controlled by China. And there's a lot of human trafficking themes in pornography. And when people are bombarded with that type of expression of human sexuality, especially young people, they can become numb to it and, frankly, not even care, because they come to think that it's normal when it's anything but. So yeah, I find that revelation of sexual assault to the Uyghur women to be very disturbing, as well as the fact that they are basically being forced to marry the Han's Chinese. Right. So there is a growing awareness around the world regarding the Uyghur situation. But be advised, right? Criticism of China, whatever it is, can likely be used in a nationalistic sense as the U.S. inches closer to a potential conflict with China. Okay, so it is important to know about the atrocities taking place, but also that these things are often being used for military or geopolitical purposes when these revelations come out. Okay, because if they want to contain this and cover this up, which they did for years, they would and they could, and they have. Only now is some of this starting to come to light, like the fact that certain companies, corporations, have been buying these slave goods, this seafood. Kroger, Walmart, Albertsons, Cisco, other companies, hospitals, prisons, on and on and on. And that should tell people something, right? That the military and the prisoners, in some cases, are eating the same crap. You can go online and learn more about the Uyghurs and what is taking place there, I'm going to now play for you this this video from CBS News. And again, it talks about how there is an increase in influencers out there promoting this region of China for the Han Chinese to move into to displace the Uyghurs. And as long as they've been doing this, at least the last decade or so, last few years to last decade, the population has been cut in half. The population growth or the birth rate has been cut in half of the Uyghurs. And YouTube, for a while, when you looked up the Uyghurs, was promoting Chinese influencers putting out disinformation using women, saying that these concentration camps were basically resorts, right? Country clubs, that the Uyghurs are being treated well there. You know, and so one of the things that China is doing is rewriting the Quran, is engaged in various types of torture and rape, and even allegations of the shaving of the head. Right? So, in conclusion, people should wake up to this, because they've programmed people to hate the Muslims around the world. Yet at the same time, these governments are preparing to go to war with each other. And there's obviously a strong anger that the Chinese have towards the American government, and in some cases, maybe even the American people. I don't doubt that for 1 minute. And so if they're going to do some of these things to their own people, to their own population, innocent people, what would they do to citizens in foreign governments that they later may be occupying or affecting in some way? Governments that they later may be at war with. So we'll go now to this clip from CBS News. Thanks for listening.
It's a region of China that was off limits during the pandemic, but western Xinjiang province, origin of the Silk Road, the ancient gateway for trade to the Middle East, is again open for tourism and raising questions. Elizabeth Palmer takes us for a visit.
Xinjiang, on China's western frontier, is being marketed these days by the state both for its beauty and its business opportunities. This tour was arranged by the Chinese government's information office. It rented the buses, it set the itinerary, and it also provided the translators and the staff that has accompanied us every step of the way. They showed us everything from agricultural machinery to ancient ruins to e-sales of local plums on TikTok. What we didn't see was evidence of these, the detention centers and prisons that turned Xinjiang into an international scandal.
I am Tumaras Yalqun, daughter of Yalqun Rozi, the renowned Uyghur literary critic, writer, and educator. My father has been forcibly disappeared since 2016 and is suffering in the Chinese prison.
Human rights groups say that starting in 2014, up to 1 million Muslim Uyghur people were rounded up in Xinjiang and imprisoned. Those who could escaped, and thousands settled in the United States.
Detention facilities.
Babur Ilchi is with the Uyghur Human Rights Project in Washington.
What is it about the Uyghur people that threatens the Chinese Communist Party?
Ethnically, we're not Chinese. We're not Han Chinese. We're separate from the majority of China. The Chinese government perceived us as a potential threat to their complete supremacy over China.
Meanwhile, the government has been investing heavily in Xinjiang. For example, its multi-billion-dollar high-speed train. Everywhere we saw evidence of the eye-watering money China's spending on infrastructure and tourist development. The message? Forget human rights abuses, take in the sights. Zhu Bin, one of our translators, is Han Chinese. He grew up in Xinjiang and wanted to tell us how proud he is of the area he's always called home.
I hope you could change some of the ideas or change some of the impressions which has been spread by some Western medias about Xinjiang.
He's talking about those Uyghur detention centers that at first the Chinese government denied existed. But after they showed up in satellite pictures, it said they'd all been closed in 2019. The official with us wouldn't go on camera, but did confirm we had driven by one which he said wasn't worth pointing out because it was shut down. Instead, we saw ethnic dancing, local wine production, and a village remodeled and beautified especially for tourists. But there was no chance to speak casually with the people who lived there, and of private Uyghur life, we caught only passing glimpses. There was one official nod to China's crackdown on the Uyghurs, the extremist museum in Xinjiang's capital, Urumqi. Gruesome exhibits recall attacks by Uyghur extremists going back to the 1990s. In one, says the guide, 1,700 people were injured and 300 stores were burned. The message is China's government had no choice but to come down hard.
The Chinese government, as you well know, will say, listen, we had some very serious terrorist attacks and we just responded.
If your response to acts of violence or perceived acts of terrorism are to round up an entire ethnic group into mass concentration camps, then you have gone beyond your ability to defend yourself.
At night in Urumqi, we did see some heavy security presence. But overall, with facial recognition cameras everywhere, the policing and the atmosphere were relaxed. The very fact of this tour shows China's government believes it has brought the Uyghurs to heel.
Everything that we've seen on this tour and everything that we haven't underscores China's determination to rebrand Xinjiang. So it's no longer notorious for gross human rights violations against the Uyghurs, but rather famous as a tourist attraction.
The traditions of Islam were once everywhere in Xinjiang. Religion was a pillar of Uyghur community life, and so were conservative customs. Veils for women, beards for men. Not anymore. The law now discourages overt religious expression, even dress, in public. Meanwhile, majority Han Chinese influence is officially encouraged. The ancient capital, Kashgar, is now Kashi, its Chinese Mandarin name. In the Xinjiang bazaars, Uyghurs have been Disneyfied. Even the sacred Idka Mosque sells tickets to tourists. In Urumqi's bazaar, we found Uyghur Imamu Maimeti Siddiqui, who told us he'd been in a re-education camp for 7 months. His crime? Being overly religious. I wouldn't even let my wife work, he said. And now he responds with the party line. I learned I'd been breaking Chinese law and reformed. But with surveillance cameras watching and our official guides very nearby, how free was he to speak? We'll never know. It's showtime in Nazarbag Village Kindergarten for local Uyghur kids. Officially, the Chinese government promotes bilingual education for them, but this is Mandarin, and so are those books back there on the shelves. The Chinese government wants the world to believe its draconian crackdown was a good thing for stability, security, and for the Uyghurs themselves. If the Uyghurs disagree, they're not saying, least of all to us. And as far as China's concerned, that is mission accomplished. Welcome to Xinjiang 2.0.